either I'm going down in flames or I'm not going down. Like, that's the only way I'm doing this. And we had the best August and September of our lives.
Welcome to Style as Identity, a podcast by the Majority Group. Join us as we get to know the designers and founders who are shifting our understanding of the style status quo. We're your hosts. I'm Lola Quintero.
And I'm Frankie Aquazum. Join us each episode as we learn from brands that are an extension of their values, identity, and aesthetic, and are super open about sharing the less talked about aspects of what they do. We're so glad you're here. Naomi Nomi, a made-to-order small batch garment line based in Brooklyn. They make beautiful Oxfords, dresses, and more from brilliant materials for doing life's everyday work.
Turn up your headphones and buckle your belts because Nomi takes us on a ride. She does not shy away from sharing the trade-offs required to keep a brand alive. And after this convo, we're convinced her energy around brand building, awareness of self, and eye for design is her secret sauce for making it happen. Let's hear about it. Naomi Nomi, hi.
Hi, nice to see you guys.
Hi, Naomi. It's so good to see you.
We're so excited to be here in Dumbo with you and the F train and all the noises.
And your team and your studio.
And Lady the dog.
Lady, she's passed out over there. She's ignoring us.
Living my dream life.
Well, let's get into it. Who is Naomi Nomi for?
Naomi Nomi is for working women, and we have a very expanded notion of what working is and what women are. We are a made-to-order garment line based here in Brooklyn. We design everything in Brooklyn. We sew everything in Queens, and we are completely obsessed with amazing fabrics and touch and feeling. Yeah.
And you just said you have an expanded notion of what women and working women are. So tell me more about that.
Yes. So mostly when a lot of people talk about working women, they're usually talking about actually waged work. And I think that is a huge misconception of what it means to be a working woman. When I think about like the original workwear for women, I think about things like the apron. I think about things like the house dress. I think about things like sewing uniforms in the 1830s. You know, what is the difference between a man in the 1950s wearing a three-piece suit with a tie and a woman in the 50s not getting paid to take care of the children and clean the house all day? When I say, you know, I don't discriminate in any ways against what waged work is. I think that's just really important when you talk about that. Also, in terms of expanded notion of woman, it's anyone who identifies as a woman or not. I design for, I guess you could say, a female form, but Nomi is a party that I want everyone to feel invited to. And so 10-15% of my customers are men, and I love that. You know, and they come in, they're like, hey, but the sleeves are a little bit too short. Can you make them longer? And I'm like, nope. That's where we're fitting for a woman. Like, if you want to wear a woman's shirt, you look amazing in it. The proportions are slightly different than you're used to because they're not built for your body. But that's in the same way that, you know, a woman putting on a man's shirt, the proportions are slightly different. They're not built for their body, but that's what, honestly, in my opinion, makes the design interesting.
And you hear that, y'all? You're invited to the party. RSVP. Yes.
I love that you go back to the 1950s. We don't have to go all the way back there when we're talking about Naomi Nomi specifically, but like, what does success look like for the brand and how has that changed over the years?
Ultimately, in many ways, what I'm trying to create with Naomi Nomi is a financially sustainable creative enterprise. Before starting Naomi Nomi, I worked as a sculptor for basically 10 years. And before that, I worked in a nonprofit magazine. With Naomi Nomi, I'm basically trying to prove the point that you can have a business that is run in a way that the concept of creating value is not merely financial value, but it's also creative value. It's also emotional value. And so if we can make a business that is profitable and therefore sustainable in order to just keep making more creative things, that's what I'm trying to do here. And that's what success means to me.
And I love that you talked about different kinds of value. How does that take shape in love that sculpting pun. But how does that take shape in like how you want people to feel in what you make?
So the phrase we use is when you put on Naomi Nomi, I want you to feel capable of everything. I want you to feel like you just got off the phone with your best friend who gave you the pep talk of your life. Like, that is how I want you to feel every time you put on Naomi Nomi. Like, I want you to, if you want to change a tire in one of my Oxfords, you can do that in my Oxfords. If you want to go on a date in the same exact Oxford on the same night, you can go on a date in my Oxford. So that kind of range of like how women dress and how women, I kind of hate the phrase day to night, but it's sort of a shorthand for the idea that like in our natural days, we're going from under the car, changing the tire to being on a date. And like, that's just a day in the life of being a woman. You'll have spit up from your baby on your shirt 1 minute, and then the next minute you got to hop on a Zoom call. So I think any clothes that don't acknowledge the full range of things that women are expected to do
And capable of doing.
and expected and capable of doing is like a real misnomer.
Also, the capable those were your words. I was just reinserting them because they're so great.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm trying to create a brand that, I started the brand in 2018. So if you think about it, that's like the height of the girl boss era. And
Girl boss, don't know her.
you will not see the word empower anywhere on my website.
Yeah. Oh my
God.
And that's on purpose. And so because I think in many ways it sort of during that era kind of lost its meaning. But no, I want you to feel like you are so, can I say fucking on this podcast?
Say it.
So fucking powerful when
You're
you're wearing
capable of
Naomi Nomi. I want you
saying
to
it.
feel like, I want you to feel powerful.
That word empower came to mind also. And then I think we often say, you can feel empowered, you can feel inspired, and you're like, you just are. You're capable.
Yeah.
It's already in you.
You can do it. Yeah. Whatever it is, you can do it. Like, you got this far. Just keep going. Yeah.
And the girl boss era was, necessary because we're like, hello, women first. But I think in a way what it did is it created this bar that we all have to go to versus what you're saying is like the bar is wherever you are.
Yeah.
It's, come as you are. And like whatever that means could be different for everyone else.
And also it can be different at different points in your life. I have a lot of people who've bought Naomi Nomi. They come in for one of my Oxfords and they bought it when they were 27, 28. Now they're 32. They're having babies and they're like still wearing that same shirt. And I love that. And like, yeah, of course the style changed. Yeah, of course their bodies changed. But that's what's so beautiful about it. I'm making clothes that I want you to keep for 10, 20 years and pass down to your child. And so we don't have tight fits necessarily because like, that's not very nice. Or it's like, that's only going to last you a little while. Like, no, you want like generous, beautiful fits that still, generous fits while they still show off your curves and make you feel beautiful and really accentuate like the natural curves of your body. Like just because something is generous in its fit does not mean that it doesn't have to be incredibly sexy and incredibly flattering to your natural shape.
You're talking to two people that sized up twice for our tops right now.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Let's talk about your wallet because all financial decisions are investment decisions, whether your brand is 1 day old or 700 days
Sweat
old.
Equity.
Sweat equity.
Sweat equity.
How do you allocate your financial resources to bring the brand to life?
So a very good friend of mine, a wise man once said, and that wise man is Dan Dugoff of Homoco.
Oh, Dan.
He once gave me
Shout out
incredible,
Dan.
Shout out to Dan, incredible brand, incredible designer.
Season 1, episode 1.
Yes.
Wow, episode 1.
Yeah.
He really
The
was.
king. Dan gave me great advice when I was first starting Naomi Nomi, and he had just closed D. Dugoff and he was starting Homoco. He was like, for every minute and dollar you spend making the garment, Nomi, you have to remember to spend the money and the time telling people about the garment, and that goes to the heart of what I love about clothing is that, if you take the context that I came from a sculptural world, if an artwork is never seen by a person, is it still an artwork? I kind of vote on the like, maybe not. Like, I think an artwork needs an audience to exist. And in the same way, I think clothing needs a consumer to exist. And so if no one's buying the clothes that I've made and they're just sitting in a room unworn, like I sort of think of it as an equation, and that's an incomplete equation. In order for it to be fashion, in order for it to be clothing, you need the input of the person. And not only just the person who's wearing it, but they actually have to buy it. I think that the transaction of money is actually very important in clothing and sort of solidifying it as a garment and solidifying the garment's purpose in this world. And so I think a lot about that. I sort of think about it 50-50. It's like, okay, the designing, but then it's not really a complete garment unless someone wears it and knows about it and has purchased it. And so in terms of allocation of resources, that understanding of like, it's not really a garment, Nomi, until it's worn drives a lot of my motivation and drives a lot of my decisions.
So you try to think of, let's spend the same amount on supply as we spend generating demand.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like that.
The other thing is I would be remiss to not mention this. Like, if you think about an issue of scale, or you think about like all the resources that have been where I allocate them, like I try to put as much money as I can into the team because in many ways, like I brought on Gabby about 2 years in, and then I brought on Maria about a year later. And I think about all the time, like the hardest working dollar I can spend here is like on a member of the team.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the more they feel supported, the more the whole thing will grow.
So investing in team and creating and marketing, but sometimes the marketing doesn't pay off right away, right? So how do you balance, okay, I have $100, let me spend 50 on marketing, but first I got to make the product. So What does that tension look like for you? Or
Constant. It's never ending. It's constant. Because I mean, I'm a maker. And so I started this brand as someone who just wants to quell the habit of making a lot of things. When I was younger and as a sculptor, I also worked for the artist Janine and Tony. Janine always jokes, she was like, these are just intense habits that we have. We're just like the habit to like make things, the like, or the like addiction to making things is like very real for me. And so like in many ways, building Naomi Nomi has been an exercise in suppressing that urge because I can only, in terms of allocation of resources, I can only afford to make a few new things every year. Yeah. Whereas like my sketchbook's filled with like 50 new shirts that I want to make. And so really like kind of stepping out of the box and being like, okay, put on my CEO hat for a minute and be like, okay, looking at the sketchbook, the creative director has served me up these fantastic ideas, but like how do we get us to the next level? Which garments are we going to produce next?
And what goes into that thought exercise?
A number of things, everything from like, okay, the margins to where are we in terms of like the overall offerings of the brand, what my customer wants next. I feel very lucky in that I feel very in tune with what my customer wants, partially because I am my customer in many ways. And the reason I started, or one of the main impetuses for starting Naomi Nomi is that I wanted these clothes. And all my friends wanted these clothes.
We have that in common.
But it's like, so I started the brand really actually, and I didn't even realize it at the time, but very much knowing who my customer was, or who one of my customer, like one part of my customer was. And so I feel very lucky to be very like in tune with what they want 3 years, 5 years later. Yeah. In terms of who my customer is, it's interesting. It's also, it's also transformed. I sort of say that I have two different types of customers. I call them millennials and their mentors, also known as millennials and their mothers. And the big question that I talk about with, for example, we have a wonderful copywriter, Ethan, who we go back and forth on a lot of brand strategy around. We're always having this conversation like, okay, is the older customer the millennial customer in 40 years, or are they two separate customers? And our current decision or our current understanding is like, no, they're the same person, just separated by 40 years. My genderqueer millennials who like are working in creative environments, or they might be lawyers or they might work for a nonprofit. In 40 years, they're going to be the women who are on the other side of my inbox, who are like just retiring, going back into volunteering, like getting to know the grandkids. Like the number of emails I've gotten where like my grandchild will only sleep on your merino is like incredible. And then I get the emails on the other side. The mother is being like, your easy dress fits my like postpartum belly. Thank you so much. And so that's really beautiful to see. And then like I learned there's something very familial about making clothing. And I say that not just because like my family made clothing. Like my grandfather manufactured wedding gowns throughout the 20th century. And so it's sewing and making clothes has always felt very like in the family, even though my parents didn't do it at all. But clothing it's an incredibly intimate thing to dress someone. And so like the more I can acknowledge that and the more I can be like close to my customer in that kind of way, the better.
Yeah. And that does go back to what you said earlier. I know we were talking more in terms of finances, but when you said, a product isn't complete until it's like
until it's drooled on,
until it's drooled on, spit on, washed. But truly, and so what you're describing here, I mean, in one sense, you were more talking about like it needs to be worn, it needs to be bought, it needs to be styled, but also like hearing the feedback stories from customers.
It needs to be activated.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love that. I always say like I love clothes in all their forms. Like I love clothes that are on the floor. I love the clothes when they're in the laundry basket. Thank you. It is a carpet. It's a fantastic carpet. My mother did not agree with that when I was 6. Clothes are objects. I mean, the thing that I always say is like, it's the only aesthetic object that you put against your crotch every morning. Clothes, you're putting a sculpt, like you're putting an artwork, basically. If we think about clothing as an artwork, you're putting an aesthetic object against your body every day.
It's another aesthetic object.
Exactly. There is nothing more personal than a garment, like in terms of a relationship between human and object. And so it's really a privilege to let someone dress you. Like you're letting them they're letting you into such an intimate space, an intimate moment. I don't take it lightly. Like before I take I do a ton of fittings and measurements. And like when I meet with people, and the first thing I say when I'm about to go measure someone is like, okay, I'm holding up the measuring tape and I'm like, is there anything you need me to know about your body, or like any place you don't want me to touch on your body? Like, because I'm about to like potentially go between your legs and like measure your inseam. I'm always surprised how shocked people are when I ask that. And it's like, no, fitting something on your body is really intimate. Like I'm going to ask permission before I get that close to you. Yeah.
So last summer you had X days of runway left.
Oh God.
You needed
fast. can't tell this story.
You know where this is going.
Fast cash to stay afloat.
Yeah.
The brand is still here today.
Yeah, thank God.
How did you make that work?
So I'll back up a little bit. So I got married last summer, and 10 days before my wedding, we're a small brand. We're 3 people. And so that means that I'm very integral to things actually happening around here most days. And so it's 10 days before the wedding. I looked at the bank account and I was like, really don't know if we're going to make it to September. This is like 10 days out from July 30th. And it was terrifying. I sat on my couch sobbing, being like, don't know if I have the money to make it to September. And I was calculating how much everyone's payroll was. And I looked at my husband and I was like, I have enough money. My wedding was July 30th. I told him, I was like, I have enough money to get to August 10th. So for the next 10 days, I'm not going to think about this. And I'm going to go get married. And I'm going to resume this panic attack on August 1st. And so he was like, that sounds like a great idea. Now, please go finish the flowers. Actually, no, finish my wedding dress. That's what I had not finished at that time.
So you made your wedding dress?
Of course, I made my wedding dress. So we get to August. So August 1st comes around. I'm looking at the bank account. I'm looking at the resources. And I was like, okay, we have a launch. Like, there's a launch that we could do. There's a launch that we're going to do at the end of the summer. And we've been tossing around the idea of a sample sale. And I was like, we need cash immediately in this company right now. We're not only is every brand, I think, in the planet like basically heavily weighted towards Q4, but we are even more heavily weighted towards Q4 in terms of our revenue because my bestseller is a wool shirt. So like you can imagine how many wool shirts I sell in July. Not many. So we basically pulled together a couple things. One, we worked our asses off for that launch at the end of the month. And that was like a really special, unique project that like could have totally flopped. It was our vintage t-shirt drop. So we basically put all our energy into that, make sure the photography, the creative was like completely perfectly on point. And then we organized a sample sale basically for like the first week in September. So we did those 2 things. And then I was like, okay, those 2 things I think will get us where we need to go. I'd been floating around the idea of so I'd been making my wedding dress and my grandfather.
Made to order.
My grandfather also manufactured wedding gowns. And so like in my head, I was like, this is a great PR piece. This is a great pitch. But I had, because of how closely I hold the business to my heart and also just like knowing how intimately like I love this business and how much this business means to me, but also trying to be at that time like very, very pragmatic about the fact that like, okay, we're in a very tough spot and wanting my personal life to stay protected in many ways, I made the decision to pitch my wedding dress the making of my wedding dress as a story. And I was very nervous about that. I'm very open on my Instagram with my personal life and in many ways, but that felt almost like a step.
Different.
It was different.
Yeah.
It felt different, especially because I had a very tiny wedding. So like not many people were invited to this wedding. But I did. I was like, you know what? It was my Hail Mary. I was like, you know what, I need it. Like, let's go. And so I pitched it and the New York Times was very excited about it. And so that in many ways, like for that month saved us. Like we picked up a ton of new customers, a ton of new eyeballs. It was just like, and on the one hand, I was like, oh, like, did I really want to do this? I'm like, no, yeah, like this business means everything to me and this wedding dress means everything to me. And actually, the more they're integrated, the better. I basically like spent last August throwing out or like just going for balls to walls on everything. I was like, there's either I'm going down in flames or I'm not going down. Like, that's the only way I'm doing this. And we had the best August and September of our lives. We did like 6 acts in August, I think. It was in many ways, I look back on it, I was like, yeah, it was actually very truthful to how I felt about the brand, how I felt about the making of my wedding dress. But yeah, I mean, I've been a founder now for 5 years and like you're in for a penny, in for a pound. Like if you're not going to throw everything you have at this, like go home. It's not worth it. So, and at that moment in my life, that was everything I had and it did great. Yeah. And we survived to now. Here we are. As Gabby said last year, I think Q2 is going to be a lot easier this year because we don't have Nomi's wedding. Great quote by my wonderful studio manager. Q2 is going to be a lot easier. Nomi's not getting married again.
I love that story because, I mean, I'm a sucker for a creative solution, like not everyone gets to just like pitch New York Times. So that is like amazing.
But it was, in my defense, it was the story was right. The story made sense. It was a great story.
But I think that's what's powerful about it is like, when we're in a bind and we think, what are my options? Let me like expand my thinking of like the thing I want is I need sales. How do I get sales ASAP? It's like, okay, if you can step out for a second, these things come to life. That happened early in my career. I had a brand. I had like no marketing budget. And my boss was just like, I didn't have any budget when I was at this top American brand. And this is what I did as a result. And so I made a folder. I was still like using paper.
Yeah.
And I made a folder and I titled it the brand, this like big brand. I was like, this is going to inspire me. If they could make it with no budget, what's my version of this?
Making it with no budget, and honestly, like, it's always better. Like, it's so bad. I like see,
it's a constraint.
It's a constraint. It's a really interesting constraint. And honestly, I think about it from a sculptural perspective. Like, there's a ton of artists I know who, like, their favorite work, my favorite work of theirs is like the work they did when they had absolutely no money. And now they're like showing at the big blue chip galleries. And I look at and I'll go see the work and I'm like, I kind of liked it better when you had no money. And on the one hand, like, you don't want to start, like, creatives deserve to get bigger budgets. And like, I don't want to deny someone the money.
I don't want to glamorize being broke.
Right. You don't want to, I 100% never want to glamorize being broke, but like, money is a real constraint and it can force you, very practically speaking, to think of other solutions.
Yeah.
And creative constraints often force us to get out of this like box that we're in, where a lot of times, like when I have a challenge, if it's something that doesn't feel like too crazy, I usually just only look for solutions like within a mile of where I am. But
when
you
you're
did,
shit out of luck,
you're like, everything's an opportunity. You're like, all right, that toaster, what can we do with that?
Yeah.
But on top of that, it is very special how you were able to, build on the past, but also your things that were going on in your life in a way that ended up working out.
To be a founder is to sort of have to figure those kinds of things out. And that's on the one hand. I'll toot my own horn for a moment. I've learned that I'm very, very good in a crisis. And there's been like 2 moments in Naomi Nomi where like my crisis thinking like really was very helpful. That was one moment. And the other moment actually was, if we rewind, in 2020, one of the things that sort of put Naomi Nomi like really out there was March of 2020, March 18th. New York is shutting down. Italy closed.
Italy said bye.
Italy's closed. New York is shutting down.
Italy's like, don't call us.
Yes.
Don't call. We will be home, but we won't answer.
We're not even home. We fled. And Italy's closed. New York is shutting down. I have my entire spring line basically about to be photographed in like 10 days. My friend who's a journalist calls me. She's like, Nomi, you're not photographing that. Like, that's not happening. Like, COVID is here. Welcome to the COVID world. You won't be able to do a fitting in person for 9 months. And I was like, well, that's not possible. I realized she was right. And I spent basically the first 10 days of the pandemic trying to just help like figure out how we can get PPE to places and like making masks. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And the same friend who was a journalist messaged me one morning and she was like, hey, I have to go out on the field, but like I'm going into a hospital and I need a mask and I can't find a mask anywhere. Like, you were making some, can you make me one and throw it down the stairwell? So I made one. She drove by. I threw it out the window at her. She took it. She Instagrammed herself wearing it on the beat. Within like 20 minutes, I was getting like dozens of DMs being like, hey, can I have a mask? Can I have a mask? And so I was like, oh, okay, let me think about it. I go into the studio and I'm like, how much yardage do I have? Could I make masks out of what I have? And I look at it and I'm like, I can make 25 masks. Like, I got nothing better to do right now. My entire production's shut down. I can make 25 masks. I sat down, I made 25 masks. I put them up on a Shopify site. Now, mind you, my favorite part about this story, our new Shopify site had gone up live the day before. We had beta tested our brand new website the day before. And within 42 minutes, those 25 were sold out. I called the only girl who was sort of working with me at the time. I was 18 months old as a company. Called up Lauren. I was like, hey, you got your sewing machine at home? She's like, yeah. And I was like, if I Ubered you some fabric, can you knock out 25 masks with me? And she's like, yeah. So I put 25 more up. They sold out in 9 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
I called my factory and I was like, because we had all the fabric that was set to be cut for shirts, but we couldn't cut shirts because it was a non-essential thing. But masks,
on the other hand,
we could make. And so I called up my factory and I was like, hey, and he was at home. I was like, hey, Simon, like, if I give you an order for 300 masks, do you think you could do it? And he was like, yeah, the seamstresses all have machines at home. We could do the cutting. We could get in here. Yeah, we could do it. Okay. I was like, okay, great. I put the number up to 300. They sold out in 2 hours.
And that's how I first found out about the brand. I was looking for where to get masks. And I think Cliff was like, oh.
Nomi selling them.
Nomi saying. And
yeah.
It was so
fast.
You were so fast to that. And
we were basically the first brand. So what happened is, that was Thursday. That all happened. We had gone live on the site. We had gone live with the site Wednesday. Thursday, I sold 100 masks, basically. I put up a wait list thing just being like, hey, email me here if you want some. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with the production. Friday at 6 o'clock on the dot, the New York Times sent out a push notification saying that the CDC had officially launched or officially recommended masks for civilian use. 5 minutes later, GQ dropped an article saying masks are required. Here are 5 brands who are selling them. I was number 3. By the next morning at 7 a.m., I had 12,000 requests for masks in my inbox. And that is what saved us for COVID. In the end, I probably made about 13,000 masks.
Oh my gosh,
It was
I bet
buy
you
one,
never want to
don't-
see another.
I would be very happy never to see a mask ever again in my life. But masks saved my company.
Yeah.
And it was that
It
crisis
also
thinking.
saved lives.
Yeah.
Also,
Yes, 100%. And what I liked about it was that it really got to the heart of what I love about clothing. Again, I think I've said this in this podcast yet, but like if I wanted to make conceptual art that no one touched, I would go back to making conceptual art that no one touches. Like, no. What I love about clothing is that it fulfills not just a want and a desire, but a very specific need. You need clothes to keep you warm and make you socially acceptable in this world. And so with making masks, it was like, yes, that's like the ethos of Naomi Nomi. Like we can't make shorts. You don't need shorts right now, but you need masks. Let's recut everything, like take all the fabric and cut it into masks. And so it was a really like very crystallizing moment for me, taking all that fabric and turning it into masks. And I've never felt more true to the brand, actually. It was one of those moments that it just felt so real and so right. And the customer really responded to it. And it completely also validated why we're made to order. We don't make it until we need it. We only need it when you want it. And so that was, everyone else had already cut their spring lines and was sitting on hundreds of thousands of pieces of merchandise that no one was going to buy because no one was going out that summer. But they needed masks, and we were able to pivot instantaneously.
What you're describing is agility, but I like how which is, I would say, what people normally use, the word people normally use on like the business side, because they're like, oh, we're agile. But what I like is that you actually paint it from like a customer point of view. You're responsive.
I'm responsive. I'm
like,
highly responsive to my customers.
So part of the DNA of the brand to be like, have an ear to what your customers need and like fit into their lifestyle that way.
So I think about that in two ways. Trend and inventory. My grandfather went out of business in the 1970s when people stopped wearing wedding gowns and became a hippie and stopped wearing wedding gowns. Basically, it completely killed his business. He had inventory and he had trendy wedding dresses. And it's like those two things I've sort of grown up with, knowing like if you're going to do fashion, like don't carry inventory. Inventory is really dangerous. Like when I think about the idea of carrying big amounts of inventory, it kind of feels like trying to turn a cruise ship around in the Hudson. Like it's not very easy. Have you ever tried to see them do that? It's really funny to watch.
Not a good
look. It's really
look.
awkward. Those two things, like being agile and inventory, is what makes you not agile in fashion because it makes you very heavy. Yeah.
You identified your second crisis. You identified a trend. Said, "Hey, I can figure this out." Your next crisis. Do you think you'll remember that enough? Or do you think you're going to be like, I don't fucking know,
Yeah, I think in my I look forward to my next crisis. It's probably around the corner. It's probably tomorrow. Let's be real here. No, crises, and maybe this is because of the way that I grew up, but like crises kind of are very clarifying for me in many ways because you wind up having to only focus on the things you have to focus on, which in many ways is like very good for being a CEO person.
Yeah. You know they will happen.
Right. But also like, they will happen, there's always a solution. And like what happens for me in crises is it crystallizes and you're like, well, this is the only option. So this is what we have to do. Mm-hmm. Crisis sort of like allows me to sort of bat away all the fluff. You're like, okay, what's at the core of what we're trying to do here?
Now, thinking about the mask scenario, what was left behind was this shirt, these items you had designed and had been ready to go. Did they ever come to life?
Yes, actually. We had designed 3. I left one in behind because I redesigned the dress the one that I left behind turned into the easy dress. The bike shorts came back better than ever, and the tanks came back the next year.
You didn't say goodbye. You said,
yeah, no, it's just I put them on hold for next year.
Yeah.
I wore the samples all summer. They were very cute.
And you talk a lot about your customer and consumer, and I think things that as a consumer that matter to me are, on one hand, quality. You talked earlier about you want things to last for 20 years, 40 years, as long as we all live. But also, a very real thing is affordability. And so how do you balance both quality and affordability? And is there tension there?
There's totally tension there. There's totally tension there. Something to know about me also as in building this company is I'm a terrible shopper because I've sewn my entire life. So I've never shopped like a normal person. I shop like a person who's like, oh, this would look great if I took off the sleeves and hemmed it 6 inches. Like that's not a normal way to shop. And so I've wound up having to do like a ton of customer research and just like talking to people because like I have no realistic sense of what things should cost in many ways, like on my budget. Also, remember, I've been an artist for the last 15 years. My bank account is not exactly overflowing from that. So especially when I started the brand, like couldn't afford my clothes on the salary that I had been making. So I had to do a ton of research as to like, how much should this cost? Where are my comps? Like, so we do pretty much for any garment that we make, we do a huge comp document of like, okay, what are all the other people selling this type of garment for? I talk to people who are sort of like my like OG customers. I have a tag in my database, actually, that's guinea piglets. And they're like the 20 friends who I am like, hey, like, am I out to lunch on this? Or like, they're the people I just need like a gut check for. And all of them are customers. And so, yeah, I would say I do a ton of research there. And it is always a struggle, where I'm always like, for example, we're about to, in the fall, we'll be coming out with an organic cotton. We're going to be switching over our crisp white and Brighton to organic. We had to raise our prices during inflation. And so right now my non-organic cotton shirt is $198. And if it's organic and it's a brand new fabric, it's more expensive. I'm going to probably need to raise that price. But I mean, Gabby, my wonderful production director over here, and I are in a current conversation. Should we call this conversation current? Does the cotton Oxford need to have a 1 in the front of it? The second you go from 198 to 210, 218, it's a very different garment. I completely understand that. I basically, with that if we make that decision, I can cancel out a huge portion of customers who just like, they're not going to spend $200 on a cotton Oxford.
As we wrap up here, the thing that sticks with me is, this theme exists because one of the closest discussions that brands don't discuss is price, cost, affordability, and the allocation. And the fact that you have 20 customers, whether they're friends first, customers as a result, or customers that have become friends.
Oh, those are my favorite, the customers who become friends.
Having that as your answer. A lot of people don't do that, and that they're going to give you the answers, hopefully, that you actually need to hear, not that you want to hear.
Yeah, and exactly. The guinea piglet group is at this point probably 50% people who were friends first, then customers. And now I have an amazing group of people who are customers first, friends second, and I'll run it past them. And and it's really also funny just to see like my different friends have different, like, I know which one of my friends was cheap before. Now I really know which one's cheap. But like, that's good. It's like, I know like that person, like, yeah, that person is not spending this, but like that person is. And so it's a bell curve.
And how many people?
Where do we stand?
What's the total available market for that
exactly.
are like that person? Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I know that because I have two very distinct groups, millennials and their mentors, those two people have very different understandings of what things should cost. I know that my clothes are a little bit of a financial reach for my younger customer. And I know that my clothes are cheap for my older customer. My older customer is used to spending $350 on a cotton Oxford. My younger customer is used to spending $90 on a cotton Oxford. And so we position ourselves in between.
Well, treat yourself for some and
and buy 2 for others.
Yeah, buy 2 for others. But Nomi, you are so precious.
Yes. Damn, I love these brands.
Same. I mean, I love that they're just into getting on a podcast and having a very real conversation about what's enabled their brand to survive.
I love it. Okay, let's keep learning together. And all you out there, if it's in your journey to make a purchase today, check out some of the brands we've been talking to.
And if it's in your journey to show us some love, hit that subscribe button.
See you next time.
Bye.